What happens when the world's governments collectively agree that they're only 60% prepared for the risks that could collapse society as we know it? The United Nations has just released its inaugural global risk report, and the findings should concern every business leader, entrepreneur, and professional listening to this podcast. They've surveyed over 1,100 experts across 136 countries, and the consensus is sobering. We are underprepared, interconnected in ways we don't fully understand, and the risks are already here. Meanwhile, the food and beverage industry is quietly abandoning its net zero promises. Companies like Diageo and PepsiCo are pushing back their climate targets by a decade or more. But here's the twist: this isn't necessarily corporate failure. It might actually be the beginning of something smarter. Coming up on Unbreakable Ventures, we examine the UN's warning about a polycrisis era where risks compound and amplify each other. We look at why the food industry's retreat from net zero might signal a more honest approach to climate resilience. And we'll share 5 quickfire threats we've been tracking this fortnight, including a volcano that hadn't erupted in 12,000 years now, disrupting global aviation. It's Monday, the 1st of December, and we're covering the world's global threats over the last fortnight. So grab a coffee and let's get into it. Welcome to Unbreakable Ventures. I'm Ollie Law, and you are listening to our Fortnightly Risk Update, where we dive into emerging and current risks from around the world, focusing on some big stories and some you may have missed. We use the categories from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report to simplify the threats we're monitoring, but we also do some deep dives and interviews with industry peers. If this is the first time you join us, please consider subscribing. The more listeners we achieve, the better quality the resource and advice we can give. Our publication is free to those who subscribe, and we compensate our specialist advisors who help build these podcasts through subscriber base. If after a few episodes you feel it is not your thing, then no problem. You can always unsubscribe. But for now, let's get into our main story and look at what we think you need to know about this week. Let me start with a question. If you had to rate how prepared the world is for catastrophic risks on a scale of 1 to 7, where would you put us? Well, the United Nations gave their answer, 4.3. That's barely above the midpoint, barely passing. And this isn't some academic exercise. This is the result of the UN's first ever global risk report, surveying 1,111 experts from government, civil society, the private sector and academia across 136 countries. The message is clear, the risks are real, they're interconnected, and we are dangerously underprepared. Let's break down what this report actually tells us. First, the methodology. The UN didn't just pick risks out of thin air. They reviewed over 40 global and regional risk publications, identified more than 100 potential risks, and narrowed that down to 28 through expert validation. These 28 risks were then assessed for likelihood, severity, and critically, how prepared we are to face them. So what topped the list? Environmental risks dominate. Inaction on climate change ranked as the number 1 global risk. Large-scale pollution came second. Natural hazard risks third. Biodiversity decline fourth. New pandemics fifth. 5 of the top 10 most important global risks are environmental. But here's where I think it gets interesting. The UN introduced a concept called global vulnerabilities. These aren't just important risks. They're risks where we have the widest gap between importance and preparedness. And the number 1 global vulnerability, mis and disinformation. Over 80% of survey respondents said mis and disinformation is already occurring. Not a future threat, not something to watch for, it's happening right now. And the UN warns that this risk acts as what they call a destabilizing multiplier. It doesn't just exist on its own, it makes every other risk worse. Think about it. Misinformation undermines trust in science, which slows climate action. It fuels political polarization, which weakens governance. It disrupts emergency response during crises. It escalates conflicts, and it corrodes the very social cohesion that societies need to respond to any of these other threats.
China's defense ministry has warned Japan will pay a painful price if it crosses a line on Taiwan. The comments are...
President Trump has insisted that Iran's nuclear sites were completely destroyed.
What happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. There are things happening in the Arctic now that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago.
Now, let me highlight something that should concern every business leader listening. The UN identified geopolitical tensions as the single most interconnected risk in their entire analysis. It's the risk that connects to and amplifies nearly every other risk in the system. Economic fragmentation, conflict, inequality, supply chain failure, mass movement of people. All of these flow through geopolitical instability. We're not looking at isolated risks anymore. We're looking at what experts call a polycrisis, a situation where multiple risks interact, compound, and create cascading failures across systems. It's not one thing going wrong. It's everything going wrong at once because everything is connected. So where are we most vulnerable? Well, the report identifies several clusters. On technology, we're badly underprepared for cybersecurity breakdown, AI-related harms, and technological power concentration in the hands of a few players. On societal risks, the rise in inequalities and collapse of social cohesion are accelerating. On political risks, the erosion of multilateral institutions and state sovereignty creates instability. And the barriers to action, weak governance tops the list, followed by lack of political consensus, lack of trust and accountability, incorrect risk prioritization, and insufficient data. Here's the silver lining, if we can call it that. The report outlines 4 possible futures: breakdown, status quo, progress, and breakthrough. The message is that none of these is predetermined. The future is a choice, not a certainty. Multi-government cooperation ranked as the most effective action for addressing global risks. Joint action between governments and civil society came second. Joint action between governments and the private sector came third. The pattern is clear. Fragmentation leads to failure. Collaboration leads to resilience. So, who should be concerned? If you operate in a globally connected supply chain, the interconnected nature of these risks means disruption in one area can cascade rapidly into others. If your business model depends on stable governance, predictable regulation, or social cohesion, these are all under increasing strain. If you're in any sector dependent on accurate public information, from healthcare to finance to critical infrastructure, the rise of disinformation threatens your operating environment. So what can we do? First, audit your risk interdependencies. Most organizations assess risks in silos. The UN report makes clear that risks don't exist in silos. Start mapping how a geopolitical disruption could affect your supply chain, which could affect your financial position, which could affect your ability to retain talent. Second, invest in information integrity, whether that's media literacy programs for your team, robust verification processes for the information you act on, or crisis communication plans that account for misinformation. The information environment is now a core business risk. Third, build coalition relationships. The report is unambiguous that individual actors, whether countries or companies, cannot address these risks alone. Identify who your key stakeholders are: government, industry associations, civil society partners, and strengthen those relationships now, not during a crisis. The UN's inaugural Global Risk Report isn't just another warning, it's a blueprint for understanding how our interconnected world creates interconnected risks. The question isn't whether these risks will affect your organization. The question is whether you'll be prepared when they do. Before we move on to our second threat update, let's look at 5 quickfire emerging threats we've picked up throughout the fortnight. These will be noteworthy stories we think you should know about, but less detailed than our 2 core threats analysed, and stories we'll continue to keep an eye on for development. TSMC has confirmed that a power outage at Fab 21 in Arizona, their flagship US manufacturing facility, forced production to halt for several hours in late September. The disruption didn't originate at the fab itself, but at Linde, an industrial gas supplier. When Linde lost power, they couldn't deliver the gases essential for chip production. TSMC had to scrap wafers as a result. The exact losses haven't been disclosed, but it highlights a critical point. Even when you have backup generators, you can be taken down by a supplier dependency you hadn't fully accounted for. TSMC says they're now working to ensure this single point of failure doesn't affect future production phases. But it's important to remember, not all scenarios allow for this opportunity to correct course. New research from Semperis surveyed organisations across 10 countries and found that 52% of ransomware attacks occur on holidays or weekends when cybersecurity staffing is reduced. In Australia and New Zealand specifically, 85% of organisations with in-house security operations centres reduced staffing by 50% or more during these periods. Even more concerning, 81% of attacks in the region followed material corporate events like mergers, acquisitions, IPOs, or layoffs. The message is clear: attackers are strategic about timing. If you're cutting security coverage when your organisation is distracted or understaffed, you're creating exactly the window they're looking for. A new Aon survey of nearly 3,000 risk managers and C-suite executives found that Indian firms rank cyber attacks and data breaches as their top current business risk, but they see AI and climate change as the major threats by 2028. The survey also revealed significant losses already occurring. Nearly 78% of respondents reported losses from property damage, 64% from exchange rate fluctuations, and 46% from business interruption. The response has been rapid formalisation of risk management, with 70% of respondents now having dedicated risk and insurance teams. Ethiopia's Haile Gubbi volcano erupted on November 23rd for the first time in recorded history. The eruption sent an ash column up to 45,000 feet into the atmosphere, with the plume drifting eastward across the Red Sea, the Arabian Peninsula, and into India. Air India cancelled over a dozen flights. Indigo and Akasa Air suspended Middle East routes. The ash affected visibility and air quality across parts of northern India, from Rajasthan to Delhi. By now, the ash cloud has largely dispersed, but the event is a stark reminder that volcanic hazards, ranked in the UN report as one of the risks we're least prepared for, can emerge suddenly from dormant sources and affect regions thousands of kilometres away. Australia's second largest telecommunications provider experienced another service disruption this week, this time affecting over 14,000 customers in Melbourne's southeast. The company has pointed to physical infrastructure damage, with evidence of aerial fibre being cut and copper removed from a pit, potentially vandalism or theft. This is the fourth major Optus outage impacting 000 emergency services in recent months. The September incident, caused by a routine firewall upgrade, blocked around 600 emergency calls and has been linked to at least 4 deaths. The pattern highlights a critical point for any organisation. Your essential services, the ones people depend on in emergencies, may be operated by private entities with their own vulnerabilities. In New Zealand, for example, 111 is managed by Spark. The resilience of these lifeline services is only as strong as the organisations running them. As a society, we should be campaigning for baseline resilience to be mandatory and regularly validated for any organisation managing such critical infrastructure. Further sources and references can be found in the footnotes of this podcast. But without further ado, let's look at our second threat update this week. Food companies are abandoning net zero. But is that actually the right move? Here's a confession that most sustainability professionals don't want to make publicly. When food and beverage companies set their net zero targets after COP26 in 2021, many of them didn't actually know how they were going to achieve them. That's not me being cynical. That's what the companies themselves are now admitting. Diageo, the drinks giant behind Guinness and Smirnoff, put it plainly in their August 2025 statement. In 2020, they said, when we set ambitious environmental sustainability goals, we didn't have all the answers. So what is happening here? Is this corporate failure, a retreat from responsibility, or something else entirely? I'd argue it's actually the beginning of a more honest conversation about climate resilience. Let me explain. The first problem was that net zero targets were largely marketing driven. Companies rushed to match the political ambition coming out of COP26. Setting a 2040 or 2050 target felt bold and progressive, but Scope 3 emissions, the indirect emissions from your entire value chain, account for 90% or more of a food company's total footprint, and most companies had no realistic pathway to address them. The second problem was that the world changed. Since 2021, we've had the Ukraine war driving up energy and commodity prices, inflation pressuring every line item in operating budgets, extreme weather events hammering agricultural supply chains. Spain and Greece experienced their worst olive harvests in living memory due to drought. Geopolitical tensions creating tariff uncertainty. Consumer preferences shifting unpredictably. The result? Sustainability initiatives got crowded out by immediate operational pressures. But here's where it gets interesting. Rather than abandoning climate action entirely, many companies are now reframing it around a different word: resilience. This isn't just a rebrand, it's a fundamentally different approach. The old approach was, we need to reduce emissions to meet a target. The new approach is, we need to secure our ingredient supply chains against climate disruption, and reducing emissions is part of how we do that. Let me give you a concrete example. The Complete Food Group, a UK manufacturer supplying retail and food service customers, experienced firsthand what climate disruption means for business. In 2023, sourcing olives became massively challenging after drought decimated production in Spain and Greece. That wasn't a sustainability target, that was an operational crisis. Now they're working on longer-term contracts with suppliers, implementing more sustainable farming practices, and reducing animal protein in recipes where plant-based alternatives work. Not because of a distant net zero target, but because these actions make their supply chain more reliable. Greencore, another UK food supplier, has a supply network spanning nearly 7,000 Tier 3 suppliers, mostly farmers. They're now increasing sourcing from UK hydroponic farms, specifically because these offer more stability as the climate changes. The message emerging from the industry is clear. Climate action is being reframed from a compliance exercise to a strategic necessity. But let's not pretend everything is rosy. In April this year, a group of anonymous food industry whistleblowers working in sustainability broke ranks to warn that corporate risks are still not being treated as critical to strategy. Mitigation measures, they said, are not commensurate with the level of risk, and sustainability is still viewed primarily through a compliance lens rather than a core business function. The gap between rhetoric and action remains significant. Many companies still haven't connected their sustainability teams to procurement, finance, or risk functions. The data they need to understand climate impacts at the ingredient level often doesn't exist or isn't being used. So who should be concerned? If you're in any business dependent on agricultural supply chains, the climate disruption affecting food companies will eventually affect you. If your procurement strategy assumes consistent, predictable sourcing from established regions, that assumption is increasingly risky. If your sustainability commitments aren't connected to your core business strategy, you're likely to face the same credibility challenges these food companies are now navigating. What can you do? First, audit your supply chain for climate exposure. Not just who your suppliers are, but where their raw materials come from, how vulnerable those regions are to extreme weather, drought, or other climate impacts. Second, get sustainability into the room with procurement and finance. If your sustainability team is operating in isolation, their targets will always be vulnerable to being deprioritized when operational pressures hit. Third, shift from distant targets to near-term resilience. A 2050 net zero commitment matters less than demonstrable progress on supply chain stability, energy efficiency, and waste reduction today. The food industry's retreat from ambitious net zero targets isn't necessarily a failure. It might be the recognition that credible, achievable progress matters more than ambitious promises you can't keep. The question for every business is this: are you making the same shift from marketing-driven targets to genuine operational resilience? That's it for today's update. If you need help navigating these threats or building a plan to protect your business, the same advisors who collate these insights are here to help. Head over to unbreakableventures.com to book a complimentary chat online with one of them. And if you found this resource useful, consider subscribing to Unbreakable Ventures or sharing the article with your network. After all, resilience is about community and communication. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, stay safe.
Unbreakable Ventures is brought to you by the Senior Advisory Team at Fixing, a boutique resilience advisory based in the Oceania, ASEAN and India regions. Special thanks to our sponsor and Europe's leading SaaS provider for resilience software, F24. Our resources are researched and published by industry specialists across New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia and the UK. This podcast provides advice and opinion on disaster recovery and the threat landscape. The content is not a substitute for expert guidance during a crisis. Unbreakable Ventures is trademarked by Fixing Consulting Partners, a Fixing Group company.